Welcome to Withdraw Consent. I'm Jack. I came across this article on Tim Walz in the Jewish Virtual Library, which I've used as sources for several different episodes, and it was talking about how he had a degree in Holocaust and genocide education. And I thought, oh, of course he did. Of course he did. I should make an episode about this before the election. So I went to do it. I went to do the research for it, and I found out that this is an interesting story. It's much more nuanced. So he's totally pro-Jewish and pro-Holocaust. And the problem is there's a conflict. There's a conflict between the far left and then establishment left. And he's like, when you hear Republicans or conservatives say, oh, Tim Walz, he's far left, or Harris, when they say that, I think it's a lot of propaganda. And in this case, he's trying to toe the line between the super far left and the establishment left, which puts him into a strange conflict with Jews. And even there's this wild thing that I didn't even know about, where if you're in the pro-Holocaust, like you love the Holocaust and you study it and you love it, it's the center of your life. But if it's not center enough, it's this weird, we're going to discuss this today. So I got two different articles I want to talk about. And we're just talking about Tim Walz, who's Kamala Harris's running mate for vice president, obviously. And we're just talking about his relationship with Jewish people. So we're not talking about anything else, his coaching. We're not talking about his, stolen valor and all that. We're just focused on this one relationship, And so we're going to talk about some different aspects of it, okay? And the two sources I have are the Jewish Virtual Library and the Jewish Chronicle. So two Jewish sources. You can find them in references below if you want to read the entire articles. But I just took out the stuff about his relation to Jewish people. So in 2001, Walz received a master's degree focused on Holocaust and genocide education at Minnesota State University. In his thesis, quote, Improving Human Rights and Genocide Studies in the American High School Classroom, end quote, he wrote, quote, schools are teaching about the Jewish Holocaust, but the way it is traditionally being taught is not leading to increased knowledge of the causes of genocide in all parts of the world, end quote. He argued that the Holocaust was not unique and should be taught, quote, in the greater context of human right abuses, end quote. Do you see where the problem is going to come here in a second with the ultra pro-Holocaust people? Okay, so later as Governor, Walz signed a law requiring the state's middle and high schools to teach about the Holocaust and encouraged them to teach about other genocides. Quote, we need to do better on Holocaust education. We need to do better on ethnic studies, end quote, he said at an event. Quote, and I tell you this as a teacher and as a governor too, we don't need test scores or anything to tell us that we're failing, end quote. No idea where we're relating Holocaust education and ethnic studies education to failing test scores. That sounds like some far left insanity, because really you just need math and English and, you need to be a competent human being in the world to graduate, not how good you did in ethnic studies or, lesbian dance theory or whatever. Anyways, so now we're talking about this controversy between him and Shapiro. So basically, when Kamala Harris was going to pick the running mate, we're in the middle of the Gaza genocide and the student protests. So this is just before this summer break at the colleges. And basically her pick was this Shapiro guy who's the governor of Pennsylvania, right? And I heard years ago that this Shapiro guy is going to be president of the United States one day, right? And so he was the easy pick. And the problem is that he's Jewish, but that's not really the problem. The problem is that it's going to look like too much of a pro-Israel pick, so that the far left, who are the students and, student protesters, people just who don't like genocide apparently, and they're going to be furious and then not vote for them. So then she basically didn't pick Shapiro, and she picked this Walz guy instead. On August 6, 2024, Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris announced that Walz was her choice for vice president. The pick excited Democrats and appeared to unite the party, though some controversy accompanied the choice. Many Democrats wanted Harris to choose Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. Some accused Harris of caving into anti-Semites who opposed Shapiro because he is Jewish. Others suggested she acted to appease progressives who objected to Shapiro's support for Israel. Donald Trump called the choice, quote, very insulting to Jewish people, end quote. That's funny. Of course he said that. That's terrific. I love that part of this. But also you got to keep in mind that there's the propaganda here is that nobody cares These people we're talking about, they don't care that Josh Shapiro is Jewish. They care about just the other day he was literally had Ukraine guys sign and he was signing bombs, in a Pennsylvania factory. Like they care that he's pro genocide in the Gaza conflict. That's what they care about because that's what they're protesting. They're not protesting Jews. They're protesting the Gaza genocide. Critics of President Biden's ironclad support for Israel hope Harris, will adopt a less sympathetic policy. One of Israel's most vocal antagonists was particularly happy with Walz's choice. Quote, "What we have is somebody who will do no harm, who is not going to step on the fact that the vice president is trying to turn a corner," end quote. James Zogby told The Intercept, quote, "This is not going to be the policy of Joe Biden. She's made that clear in a number of ways, even though she can't break from her boss. But we have every indication that she is going to turn a corner, and Walz does not impede that corner turn. Shapiro, on the other hand, would have become an issue," end quote. So the argument here is that Harris won't go against her boss now, but if she gets elected, she'll withdraw support from Israel. And Walz, as vice president, would not impede her from doing so. He would do no harm. But that Shapiro, as vice president, if she had chosen him, would stand up to her, not that. Now, I don't see any indication that Harris is going to turn a corner on Israel because they had these do you remember was it in Michigan? Minnesota, one of those? They had the, I think it was Minnesota. They had where Tim Walz is from, where they had the primary election for Joe Biden, and a double-digit percentage of people voted for nobody. They voted, but for nobody. And so you had these non-committed people at the DNC convention, and they just wanted a voice, and then they submitted their speech, and then they were denied to even come and speak there. Then they threw their support behind Harris anyways. So if she doesn't even want these people who are non-committal about, I'm sorry, I just don't see any indication that she's going to turn the corner on Israel. Anyways, Haaretz U.S. correspondent Ben Samuels disagreed with that perspective, noting that, quote, "Walz is one of a handful of Democrats who have years-long support from both pro-Israel groups, AIPAC and J Street, and have an Israel record indistinguishable from Shapiro's." Okay? So when they said years-long support from pro-Israel groups, AIPAC and J Street, so we already know about AIPAC. We got a whole episode on that. We just examine their website, and it's hilarious. I'll link that below if you haven't seen it under links. But this J Street is a nonprofit liberal Zionist advocacy group based in the United States whose stated aim is to promote American leadership to end the Arab-Israeli and Israeli-Palestinian conflicts peacefully and diplomatically. So they're like the AIPAC that wants diplomacy. They don't want the wars. I think they want a two-state solution, but they want actual peace. Now, Israel's goal is not to get peace. This is a separate subject. Israel's goal is to create greater Israel, which we did an episode on. I'll link that below, too, as a matter of fact. Okay, so now a little bit about his voting record in Congress, because he was a congressman for like 12 years before he became governor of Minnesota. As a member of Congress, he voted with the pro-Israel majority, including on a resolution condemning the UN resolution declaring Israeli settlements illegal. This was despite his view that settlements are an obstacle to peace. So the settlements that he believes are an obstacle to peace, which are illegal settlements by the UN, he voted then to condemn the UN resolution. Pretty wild. That's pretty pro-Israel. Okay. Walz faced criticism for endorsing Ilhan Omar, Democrat from Minnesota, whose antagonism toward Israel is regarded by many Jews as anti-Semitic. He also supported the Iran nuclear agreement, which Israel vehemently opposed. Okay, I believe this Iran nuclear agreement was the one signed under Obama and that Trump got rid of. And then Ilhan Omar, we know about her. She's in the squad, and she does say things that would be classified as openly anti-Semitic, though I wouldn't say untrue things, like she did all about the Benjamins tweet related to Jews, and it's not untrue, but people would classify as anti-Semitic. And so they're both in the same state. I'm not sure why he's backing her, but he is also very adjacent to the very far left. According to Axios, Walz supported a two-state solution and Israel's right to defend itself, but also referred to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza as, quote, intolerable, end quote, and praised the civic engagement of pro-Palestinian activists. He supports sending humanitarian aid to conflict zones and administration efforts to secure a ceasefire in Gaza. He posted on social media, quote, the vast majority of Palestinians are not Hamas, and Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people. We cannot let terrorists like Hamas win, end quote. Walz told Minnesota Public Radio, quote, you can hold competing things, that Israel has the right to defend itself and the atrocity of October 7th are unacceptable. But Palestinian civilians being caught in this has got to end. So this is very against the Zionist line, you know, because the Zionist line is that every Palestinian is Hamas, which doesn't make sense because, of course, there's Palestinians in the West Bank who are not under Hamas's control or authority at all. And that anything is allowed because of the barbarism. Remember, they use that word all the time, barbarism of October 7th. So they've dehumanized these people, and you're allowed to kill their women and children. So this is a good view he has. I support his view here about the intolerable situation with the humanitarian aid, that humanitarian aid should be let in. I mean, like, it's not helping Hamas to send food and water to their women and children, you know. Anyways, Walz has also said that, quote, ability of Jewish people to self-determine themselves is foundational, and the failure to recognize the state of Israel is taking away that self-determination, so it is anti-Semitic. Okay, this is a hilarious one here, right? Let's unpack this, okay? The ability of Jewish people to self-determine themselves is foundational. Okay. The ability of everybody to self-determine themselves is foundational. I agree with that statement. For every people, you can make that statement as true, right? The ability of white people in the United States to self-determine themselves is foundational. It's one of the fundamental things about this channel. Okay, so I agree with you. And the failure to recognize the state of Israel is taking away that self-determination. So it is anti-Semitic. The problem is not the failure to recognize the state of Israel. That's not the problem that's going on in the world. The problem is that they've had a blockade on Gaza for 18 years. There's people who've been born during the blockade. They were born at the beginning of the blockade, and they're now adults, and their entire life they've lived under a blockade, which is war crime by international law. Anyways, so that was from the Jewish Virtual Library. Now we're going to go to the one that just attacks Tim Walz from a Jewish perspective, right? And we're going to get into the Holocaust stuff where he is not Holocausty enough, okay? So this is called Tim Walz's Record on Israel and Anti-Semitism is Deeply Concerning, and it's by the Jewish Chronicle. Individual Jews may consider him a mensch in personal interactions, but his willingness to work and promote the policy preferences of his party's extremists is something American Jews cannot afford to overlook. So that was the subheadline, and it's pointing out that he's on the far left side. Now, we're going to see examples in this article. We're going to see some of them are legitimate examples and some of them are not. Now, if you don't know about this word mensch, I've heard it before. I don't speak Yiddish. So the Yiddish word mensch is used to describe a person who is honorable, has integrity, and is morally upright. So if you didn't know, now you know. I don't know if that makes you a worse person or what. I became a worse person yesterday for knowing it. Anyways, as Walz's party moved leftward on Israel, though, so did he. Like most Democrats, Walz voted for President Barack Obama's Iran nuclear deal in 2015. Meanwhile, AIPAC and other American Jewish organizations opposed it over concerns about regional instability. So we already mentioned this one, but I put it in here on this article because they're talking about Walz moving leftward. And so that they're talking about it's a gradual movement is the way that they're phrasing this, right? So the next time they mention that leftward trajectory is this. When Walz won Minnesota's governorship in 2018, his leftward trajectory continued, both in his actions and his choice of red-green allies. In January 2019, he publicly applauded Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, a notorious member of the Squad. Walz told an audience that on a tough day, thinking about Omar's being in Congress just brightens you up. Okay, that last part was silly to ever put in this paragraph, but it's in the article. Also, I didn't know what red-green allies means. It's not my circle, sorry. Anyways, but it's basically the Democratic Socialists, who are the Reds. So They mean communists, but they're not full communists, but like an AOC or a Bernie or whatever, and then allied with green interests. And so they're saying in this article that if Walz, how exactly did they put it? His choice in his actions and his choice of red-green allies. And then they put Ilhan Omar on there as red, but there's no, okay, whatever. I'm sorry, this is pretty silly. In 2019, Walz addressed a conference of the Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE, where he rubbed shoulders with a scholar who launched Students for Justice in Palestine, the group behind many of the pro-Hamas and anti-Semitic rallies across college campuses in the wake of October 7th attacks. This is one of the claims that's just stupid, right? This author is completely disingenuous, whoever this lady writing this. Okay. In 2019, he addressed a Council on American Islamic Relations, so that's fine. He's allowed to do that, where he rubbed shoulders with a scholar who would years later launch Students for Justice in Palestine. You know, that's like saying you served Timothy McVeigh or the Unabomber a hamburger. You totally had a funny little interaction with him. You support Unabombing? You know what I mean? It's nonsense. On at least 5 occasions as governor, Walz also hosted an imam who has shared official Hamas press releases on Facebook, along with blog posts on hate-filled websites. Okay, so I find this claim to be nonsense too, because if the imam is Palestinian and say Hamas did a press release saying, hey, there was 122 casualties in this attack, so he shares it on Facebook because he loves his people. I don't know what the posts are. And then he put blog posts on hate-filled websites. So like if you wanted to, you could say Gab Social's a hate-filled website, and that would be a correct, there's a lot of stuff on there. But there's definitely a lot of hate stuff on there, right? I put posts on there. Well, I more repost people, actually. I used to post these videos on there, actually, until they got rid of Gab Video or whatever it was. I have no idea what they got rid of that. Anyways, I don't know what his blog posts were on hate-filled websites. So I'm sorry, that one's not credible either. Walz's administration additionally granted over $100,000 to the Muslim American Society Minnesota, this imam's group, whose national umbrella organization responded to October 7th by expressing, quote, solidarity with Palestinians against Israeli attacks, end quote. This one's also nonsense. They don't say what the $100,000 were for. What if they were doing a fundraising drive specifically for this Muslims American Society Minnesota to fix kids in their community who have hair lip and need surgery? That the administration gave them the money. What's the money for? This was the money to be sent to Hamas? Was it buying rockets and sending rockets to Hamas? Well, now you got something. I'm sorry. This is so disingenuous. In touch with the anti-Israel segment of the Democratic base, Walz urged a Middle East ceasefire in March. And when 18% of Minnesota Democrats cast protest votes, I was talking about that earlier, against President Biden over Israel policy, Walz reacted respectfully. Quote, take them seriously. Their message is clear, that they think this is an intolerable situation and we can do more. And I think the president is hearing that. Okay. In touch with the anti-Israel segment of the Democratic base, he urged a Middle East ceasefire in March. High five, Tim Walz, right? Imagine being berated for calling to a ceasefire in a conflict. Whatever the conflict is, imagine you say, hey, maybe everybody should stop killing each other. Let's try some diplomacy. And you're like, you don't love war? I mean, this is nonsense. And when 18% of Minnesota Democrats, so we're talking approximately 1/5 of the entire voting Democratic Party of Minnesota wants something to happen on an issue, he treated them respectfully. This guy's the devil, right? Take them seriously. Their message is clear. Well, I don't take them seriously anymore because then they threw their weight behind Harris. But, they are actually. There was a guy I seen him the other day. I think it was the imam or something. I don't know if it was the same imam, but he was out there saying, hey, we're not going to vote for Kamala Harris. We're going to give this state to Trump. That's what it means. We're going to give it to Trump, because they won't do this. And that they think this is an intolerable situation and we can do more. So they're saying the intolerable situation is what they're protesting is genocide in Gaza. Is that intolerable? Yeah. Anybody you're genociding, I'm just going to say it's intolerable. And we can do more. Yeah. If you're currently doing a genocide, you can do more. And I think the president is hearing that. And yes, he did hear that. Well, that was Joe Biden, and he was pretty out of it. So I don't know if he actually ever heard of this story. Walz's boosters point to his speaking up for Jewish students harassed on their campuses, saying in an April interview, quote, "I think when Jewish students are telling us they feel unsafe in that, we need to believe them, and I do believe them," end quote. Notably, though, Walz didn't specify that those harassing Jews are primarily leftists. So he stood up for the Jews getting harassed on campuses, but he's wrong because he didn't note that the people harassing them are primarily leftists. He's a Democrat. He's a left. Oh, the person writing this article is a leftist. Okay, it's just nonsense. Finally, Walz, a former high school social studies teacher, is aligned with the far left on school curricula. Last year, he signed into law a new requirement that students learn about the Holocaust, along with other genocides. He believes the Jewish Holocaust should be taught in the greater context of human rights abuses rather than as a unique historical anomaly or as part of a larger unit on the Second World War. Now we're going to get into this strange controversy, right? You love the Holocaust so much that you would get a master's degree in it, but you just don't love it enough, right? You don't pass muster. Harvard professor emerita Ruth Wise, with parentheses around her name, so addressed such policy judgments in a 2020 essay for National Affairs, noting that, quote, "The potential for corruption begins with the impulse to make the Holocaust a universal symbol of evil. Nazism, synonymous with hatred, and Holocaust education, a redemptive American pursuit," end quote. Universalizing the Holocaust disregards millennia of anti-Semitism and related harms. Quote, "Internationally or not, this opposition to hate feeds the hideous ideology it pretends to resist," end quote. So this is mumbo jumbo, right? This is the pro Holocaust line, right? Look at this. Universalizing the Holocaust disregards millennia of anti-Semitism and related harms. So if you look at the Holocaust as one of many genocides, you're also not noticing thousands of years of anti-Semitism. Therefore, you're incorrectly assessing the Holocaust, which is a single thing that you can look at. I'm sorry, that logically, this a woman. Yeah, it was a woman, huh? Yeah, Ruth Wise. Yeah. Okay, no logic. Okay. But it's interesting that this exists, though, that this whole pro Holocaust and master's degree in Holocaust is not Holocausty enough. That, quote, "hideous ideology," end quote, is further taught to Minnesota students through ethnic studies, another Walz policy that Stanley Kurtz, Jewish, a senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, has characterized as race-based neo-Marxism, a kind of anti-civics in which students are taught to reject and replace America's system of government. So they're claiming that the hideous ideology is the stuff about the Holocaust, and that in their ethnic studies classes, they're learning neo-Marxism, a kind of anti-civics which students are taught to reject and replace America's system of government. But none of that has anything to do with the Holocaust. Now, there is in ethnic studies, they could be teaching the neo-Marxism in there, critical theory and stuff like that. But this is incoherent garbage. Okay. This is interesting too. Ethnic studies is mandatory in Minnesota, and Kurtz, the Jewish guy, argues Minnesota's version is more radical than progressive California's. So that's the main points of the second article, and I think the article is pretty foolish, and a lot of it isn't consistent and is deliberately misleading, very disingenuous. But I like to see the argument here. The Holocaust one is a foolish argument. Like if you were to write an essay on the Holocaust of World War II and the Armenian genocide, and you were to draw, they would hate that because this thing has to be an idol, a god unto itself, that you worship fully with full devotion. I mean, if you were, probably don't look at the Armenian genocide. It's interesting. It's very culty. And then the stuff with Walz in the far left is interesting. Now, if you were in a democracy, you're trying to get the votes, and if I ran a state, I would listen to, if I had a block of 18% of people, I would listen to what they have to say. If they were, promoting under the age of 6 sex changes or something like that, then I'm out. But it's so interesting that we're in this country where you have to support genocide, and if you call for a ceasefire, you're a villain. It's amazing. And now, if you told me that this was happening on the right, I could totally buy this because you could be in a like an evangelical state or something, a very heavy Christian. So then you get the Christian Zionism. When we've talked about that ad nauseum, we'll talk about it in the future too, because it's the main problem, I believe, that's going on in the conservative world to keep us from having our own self-determination outside of Israel's influence. But in this situation, it's interesting this happened on the far left. So on the right, it's happening because conservatives are brainwashed. Christian conservatives are brainwashed with Christian Zionism. But on the left, it's happening because people on the far, far left don't want genocide and want to break Israel's control over U.S. politics. Now, they want that for a lot of super far left political ideological reasons, which I don't support. But this is why I was in previous videos when I was talking about these protests and stuff, I was talking about we all want the same thing. When we want the end to genocide, when we want the end to Israel's control over American foreign policy, or just American policy, period, or stealing our uranium, or stealing our nuclear secrets, or, being the biggest intelligence threat in the Middle East is Israel to the United States. It's like, but then in the end, we want different goals. And the problem is always going to be that when stuff does fall apart, when stuff does collapse, the problem is that people who maybe think along the lines that we do we won't have infrastructure to make America great again, to actually make America great again for America and Americans. But we won't have the infrastructure. Problem is they will, and then that will lead to a problem. But in the meantime, we have the same goals of a few of the same goals. Definitely not the same end game. Anyways, back to Walz though. I think this was interesting. It's much more nuanced than I thought it was. When I read first that he had the master's in Holocaust Studies, I thought it was just going to be like, oh, look, another guy loves Israel, It's not that. It's much more nuanced. And I learned a lot from it. Hopefully you did too. So on Wednesday, I want to talk about all these different health things. I want to talk, people just don't talk about these. They mention them, but don't talk about them. But like the seed oils, there's vaccines, not talk about COVID. That one's a slam dunk anyways and not worth talking about. They got this thing that my wife brought me, this happening like right now today. Today is October 15th, about this BHT stuff is going on, this Kellogg cereals and these additives causing problems. And I really researched this stuff, and I got a lot of interesting stuff to present you along with solutions that you could take today, tomorrow, that I've taken recently in the last couple of months for better health for my families. And then on Thursday, I want to talk about Nazi war crimes, because I have made a mistake in multiple episodes and claimed that they did something that they did not actually do, or it's different than you would think, because I finally researched it. I want to present that to you on Thursday. Anyways, that's what I got for you. Hope to see you Wednesday.